Hi class, in this video I'm going to talk about discounts and sales tax. For sales tax, we're going to use GST, which is 5% throughout Canada. Now, let's go over the first example. A pair of Nike shoes sells for $90 as a regular price, and right now they are on sale for 20% off. So the steps to solve this question is simple. You must find the amount of the discount first. So that means you have to find what is 20% of 90. That'll be the amount discounted. Then to find the sales price, you simply take the price that you have, the $90, and subtract it from 20% of $90. Then you get a new price, which is the sales price. And the sales price, you must multiply it by GST, and GST is 5%. So then you find 5% of the sales price. That will be your GST. And for total cost, you simply add your sales price along with your GST. So let's first find the amount of the discount. So the amount of the discount is 20% off of $90. So we're actually looking for 20% of $90. In this case, if you recall, let's think about this logically here. What is 10% of 90? Well, 10% of $90 should simply be $9. Because if I take 9 and I add it by itself 10 times, I get 90. Okay, great. So then what's 20% of 90? Most likely just double of what $9 is, because if 10% is $9, 20% would just be 9 plus 9. So 20% of $90 is simply going to be $18. Okay, great. I found the amount discounted. Now let's find the sales price. The sales price is simply going to be my $90. So that's my regular price item. And I'm going to subtract it from the amount discounted. I'm going to subtract 18 because 18 is basically 20% of $90. And to have 20% off, I must subtract the $18 from my regular sales price. So after the discount of 20% off, I'm going to have 90 minus 18 is going to be 72. So my sales price is now $72. Great. Now to find GST, I simply want to find 5% of the price. But notice that the price has now been reduced to $72. To find GST, I'm simply going to find 5% of $72. I'm not finding 5% of $90 because that means I would end up paying more taxes. I'm simply finding 5% of $72 because that's my reduced sales price after the discount. Now, 5% of 72. First, let's ask ourselves this question here. What is 10% of $72? Well, if you recall, 10% of 72, I simply am going to move the decimal place back by 1 to the left, just like how I did it here for 90, and that's how I ended up getting 9. This would simply just get me $7.20. So 10% of $72 is $7.20. Now, 5% is technically just half of 70. It's just half of $7.20, right? Because if 10% is $7.20, then 5% is half of $7.20. So I simply just take 7.2 and divide it by 2. And if I do so, I believe I'm going to get $3.60. Okay, great. So that means 5% of $72 is $3.60. So my GST is $3.60. So after I buy an item for $72, I have to pay an additional $3.60. So that means my total cost must be the sales price, which is $72, plus the GST, which is $3.60. And if I add it together, I should get $75.60. So that's my total cost after the item on sale for which is originally $90 after 20% off, and after I pay GST, I'm going to pay $75.60. Okay, great. Let's do another example here. So for example 2 here, it says You buy a plasma screen television for Mr. Cable. It costs $3,000, but is 10% off. So first things first, let's find the amount discounted. So the amount discounted, I'm looking for 10% of $3,000. Now, if you recall, 10% of $3,000 is simply going to be $300, simply because I have the decimal here at the end, and anytime I'm finding 10% of a number, I just move that decimal place back by one. So I get $300 here. Okay, great. So what's my sales price? Well, originally I had to pay $3,000 for the TV, but if it's 10% off, I'm basically subtracting my discount, which is 10%, which is $300. So I'm going to pay $2,700 for the TV now. Now, before we can leave the store, we also have to pay taxes to the government. So GST is 5% of whatever we pay. So in this case here, I have to find 5% of $2,700. Now, we have to do some math here. First things first, I guess let's find, and I'll write with a different color marker so we can have it as an aside. What is 10% of 2,700? Now, if you recall, this would simply be $270, because all I'm doing when I'm finding 10% of a number is moving the decimal place back by one. Okay, great. So I got $270. Now, 5%, right? If 10% is $270, 5% is just half of that. So my 5% here would simply just be 270 divided by 2. And 270 divided by 2 is 135, right? I forgot to add the percent sign. The dollar sign. So hence, my GST should be $135. So 5% of $2,700 is $135. So not only do I have to pay the $2,700 for the TV, I have to pay the taxes as well. So for a total cost, I'm simply going to add my sales price after it's been discounted to my GST, and I'm going to get my final answer here. So this is going to be $2,835. Okay, let's do one more example here. Here it says you want to buy a video camera for $1,100. That is on sale for 30% off. Find the amount of discount. So the amount of discount. Well, I'm 30% off. So to find the amount of discount, I want to find 30% of the $1,100, right? Now, 30% of 1,100. First things first, let's find 10% of a number first, right? So 10% of $1,100 is simply going to be $110. And I know that because anytime you find 10% of a number, you have a decimal and you simply just move it back one to the left. So the decimal is now here, so it should be 110. Now, upon finding that answer, let's think about this. 30% compared to 10%. Wouldn't you guys agree that 30% is simply 10% plus 10% plus 10%? So hence 30%, right, is just going to be 110 plus 110 plus 110. So it's going to be $330 for 30%. So 30% of 1,100 is going to be $330. Great, we found the amount discounted. Now let's find the sales price. The sales price is the regular price subtracted by the discounted amount. So 30% off is $330. I subtract that from 1,100, and I'm going to get $770. Okay, great. Now, to find GST, we have to find 5% of the sales price. So I'm looking for 5% of the $770. Now, to solve for this problem, let's simply first find 10% of the $770. Now, 10% of 770 is simply going to be 77. So the same rules we've been using before. If I'm finding 10% of a number, I'm simply moving the decimal place of that number one back to the left. So hence, I'm just going to get 77. Great. I found 10% of a number. GST is 5%. So if 10% is 77, 5% should just be 77 divided by 2. And 77 divided by 2 should be, okay, let's see. Well, 70 divided by 2 is 35. 76 divided by 2 is 38. Yeah. So then that means that this should be 38.5. So I'm going to get 38.5. So my GST, my 5% of $770 should be $38.50. Now I'm going to find my total cost. So my total cost is simply going to be my sales price after it's been discounted plus my GST. So let's add those together. $770 plus $38.50. That's going to get me, let's do some thinking here. I believe it's going to be 800. Oh, 800 and $8.50. So my total cost should be $808.50.